Welcome to the Real Business of Wine focus on South Africa. This follows the model that we did a few weeks ago on Bordeaux when we looked at the en primeur situation there with no en primeur. This is a far more significant event tonight because, as anyone who knows the wine industry will have seen and be aware, the South African wine industry faces some extraordinary challenges right now. Most particularly because of the COVID-19 situation, where there's been a shutdown on internal distribution of wine and indeed shipping wine from wineries to the ports, which means that exports aren't happening, and it poses some big questions over South Africa, the South African industry's ability to ship out wine and actually fulfill orders. But in addition, there are other issues that I think are worth considering, that are historic issues that, again, we have had the history of drought that was a major problem. We've got the question of prices and so on, which are, I think, possibly too low for South African wine. However, on the other hand, what we do know is that South Africa is producing better wine than it's ever produced before, and is getting recognition internationally for the quality of its wine that it's not had in the past. So I think in many ways, this is a very good time for South Africa, despite the challenge it faces. So tonight, as we did in the Bordeaux section, Polly Hammond, my partner in crime on Real Business of Wine, and I are stepping back, and we are going to hand the steering wheel or the rudder across to two highly qualified people. One, Tim Atkin, Master of Wine, who, as everybody who knows again about South African wine, produces an annual report and sometimes I think he spends more time in South Africa than he does at home in the UK, but he's very focused on South Africa. And Jono Le Feuvre, I think I'm pronouncing it right, who is based in the Cape, has an interest in both wine and coffee, but is a trained journalist, is going to take that position. And between Tim and Jono, they are going to run a panel of, I think, 8 people. And we have, at the moment, I think about 80 people sitting in the room. So please, as participants, please do raise questions through the Q&A or through the chat. And even if your question isn't answered directly, we'll do our best to see that it's covered. It may even be answered after the event. So Polly and I are behind the scenes, keeping an eye on all of that. But I'd like now to hand over to Tim and Jono. But Tim, would you like to take the wheel, please?
I would indeed. Thank you, Robert. Very kind of you. Good evening to everybody, particularly to all my good friends in the Cape and South Africa generally. I've really missed going this year. I was supposed to be there in March and I couldn't go for obvious reasons. I'm hoping to get there in June, but I think that's also looking unlikely at the moment. It's my enormous pleasure actually just to introduce the panel. I don't know, and you're welcome to put a suggestion up in the chat box, what the collective noun for a group of South Africans would be. Ken, maybe a braai of South Africans. We have a sizzling braai of South Africans this evening. There are 10 of us all in all, and 8 of those are from South Africa, and Jono Le Feuvre and I, who I'll introduce in a second, will be co-hosting the event. So Jono, first of all, many of you will know him. He is a coffee roaster, a wine bar owner, and he's actually a journalist, a very good journalist who's done some stuff even for my site. He'll be co-hosting with me. Then in alphabetical order, we have Rico Basson. Rico is the executive director of Vinpro. Many of you will have received emails and seen Rico online and know that he is really leading the negotiations with the government as far as the wine industry is concerned. Next will be Bernhard Bredell. Bernhard Bredell of Scions of Sinai, fantastic young winemaker. He was my young winemaker of the year in the report last year rather, doing some amazing stuff with a good and important family history in Stellenbosch. After that, Ken Forrester, legend in his own lunchtime and everybody else's lunchtime and evenings as well, I think. Ken, nice to see you from Stellenbosch. Mr. Chenin Blanc, director of Ken Forrester Wines, and now obviously owned by Advini. So interesting to get a point of view of what it's like being owned by a bigger business and how they see South Africa in a global context. Hein Koegelenberg, Hein, nice to see you, is for the CEO of La Motte and of Leopard's Leap. Hein obviously has a big tourism operation, but also is very big in the Chinese market, probably the first to open up the Chinese market. So we're looking forward to seeing what Hein will say about the Chinese market. Carolyn Martin, our next South African. Carolyn is, of course, a Finlayson. The Finlaysons are all over the Cape, part of the history of the Cape, and she's the co-owner of Creation Wines on the Emlanada Ridge. Again, another person with an amazing cellar door and also a restaurant business running from the winery. Last but not least of the South Africans is Mike Ratcliffe. Mike Ratcliffe, formerly of Warwick. Now he's the managing partner of Villafonte, of course, and he's speaking tonight on behalf, I believe, of Stellenbosch, aren't you, Mike, and the Stellenbosch wineries. Those are the South Africans on the panel. The other Brit, apart from my good self, is David Cartwright. Hi, David. David is the sales director of Seckford Agencies, and we're hoping that David will give us some insight into what it's like for an importer at the moment dealing with South Africa and trying to keep the supermarkets at bay back in the UK. Okay, Jono, do you want to lead us away, or would you like me to say a little bit about where I see South Africa at the moment? I'm pretty sure Robert covered that, really, I think, in his introduction, that South Africa, I think, in many ways is in a very good place. It's making more great wines than it's ever made in its history, but there are definitely problems associated with the industry. And one of those is the low price of grapes and the profitability of the industry. But I think it's a two-way thing. So, John, I think over to you to open the discussion and introduce our first speaker.
Great. Well, I've spent the last few days talking to everyone from small wine farmers to big producers, to distributors, exporters, and just been trying to get a sense of how everyone is feeling. And what I found humbling and profound was, I think it was perhaps something that was best expressed by Bernhard when he said, look, we are in dark times, but I think if all of us realize that we can suffer a little bit, no one will have to suffer a great deal. And although that was an amazing sentiment, which I thought we could frame tonight's discussion, in that it would be an A+ for us all if we came out of this with a sense of creativity and collaboration that actually enables those who are hurting the most to see a silver lining or see a way through. So perhaps that's something that we can keep in mind as we're sharing. And one of the things that seemed to be worrying people the most was a sense of uncertainty, not knowing what is allowed to be done, what isn't allowed, when things will change. And so perhaps it seems probably best to start, Rico, with you. If you could give us kind of a summation of because you've been heading up communication with the government, and perhaps you could tell us how things have been going so far.
Jono, thanks, and Robert and Tim, thanks for the invite. Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief because I think there's a lot to talk about this evening. And just one correction, there's a whole team. I'm not the only lead on government, but there's a team that we formed with WOSA. I know Siobhan is on the line as well, and South African Liquor Brand Association. But yeah, from my side, if we just go back where we started, I think the South African government announced the COVID lockdown, I think on the 23rd of March. At that point, they said it will start on the 27th of March, and we immediately knew we are in for a crisis as a wine industry, because immediately there were three main things that we did not have because the government did not classify South African wine as an essential service or an essential product. So the three material things which we knew we need to get, at that point, the harvest was about 95% done. We still had about 40,000 tons to bring into the winery. So the first base was convince government to allow us to complete the harvest, which I'm glad to say we got them to agree, I think a couple of hours before the lockdown started. So I think that helped a lot to store and secure the wine. Secondly, to open exports, that took the team another week to convince government to open exports. And that lasted for 9 days. We can get back to that before they, out of the blue, decided that the transport of wine to harbor is not allowed anymore. And I suppose, Tim, we can get back to that. And then thirdly, I think where we are now on a Monday, and our government is phasing in the economy in different phases, which will start on Friday. And we've just submitted this morning a proposal to unlock the local market in different channels, which I'm sure someone like Mike and others can comment as well. And the fourth priority was to start seeking dispensation, because the one thing that we will not have is cash flow. And we were lucky to already receive some form of excise dispensation. But for wine, that is not going to get us out of the woods. So Jono, that's where we are. I think we're in a delicate position. We will get government's feedback tomorrow, and then we will get clarity on the way forward for exports as well as local market, including aspects of e-trade for tourism sector, I think on Thursday. So you talk certainty, I think it's been a very, very uncertain 35 days up till now.
Just one point of clarification, right? You made this clear to me yesterday when we spoke. It's not actually exports that are banned. You can export. The problem is you can't transport the wine to the point of export, right? This is this slightly Kafkaesque moment that we're in. It's not the exports. I mean, not that that really matters, because if you can't get the wine to the port, you can't export it unless you're going to carry it on your back, frankly. But I think it's important just to make that point. Could you just tell us a little bit about the level 4 thing, just from your point of view, and then we'll open it up, Jono, to the others, shall we?
Look, firstly, and I know there's been a lot of media about South Africa, not all positive, but personally, I want to commend the government in being proactive, moving very early to secure a full lockdown. I know as business and economy, we knew the impact immediately. But I think somehow for a country that's heading into the winter, has got huge socioeconomic challenges, informal settlements where social distancing is a problem, I do think that it was the right thing to do. Where we are now is they've tiered it in levels, as I said, Tim, from 5 to 1. And level 4, we will see if I read the regulations right, that export and the associated transport as well as packaging procurement will be allowed. And we, as I said, I do think that for wine, aspects or elements of the local market. So in numbers, about 1.3 million South Africans will go back to work on next week, Monday. Which is part of much needed income to buy food. I think South Africans, there's a huge challenge on food, not so much production, but delivery.
Just to make clear to everybody, these levels, 5 is total lockdown and 1 is back to normal, if we ever get back to normal, obviously, but that's unlikely at the moment. So 4 is obviously less stringent than 5. Anyway, sorry, Jono, back to you.
Well, I was going to say another thing worth noting is that the Western Cape has currently got some of the worst COVID statistics in the country, which certainly doesn't help matters, especially given that each province will be able to move between levels according to how well the virus is being contained. So we're not off to a great start. And what adds to this is we've already touched on the complexity of the production chain. And the fact that you can switch between 4 and 5 and 3 and 4, at a whim, is probably causing the most concern, given how complicated this whole chain is. I thought maybe, Bernhard, do you think you could start us off as someone literally and figuratively close to the ground? Can you tell us some of the struggles and challenges you've been facing?
You have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jono, Tim, and also just thank you so much, Rico, for you and your team and all the hard work you guys are doing behind the scenes on the floor. But Jono, to answer your question, I think our first concern was, as Rico also mentioned, that we were just at the verge of finishing harvest. So our first concern was, are we actually going to be able to tuck our wines that are freshly finished to ferment into barrel? Are we going to be allowed to even be on the road back to our wineries during the day? So it was very stressful, that situation. And I think that we had about 3 days, and you saw a lot of other winemakers here and independent guys, discussing, you know, what should we do with wines that just came in or halfway through fermentation? Are we going to take care of them? So there was certainly this big concern among winemakers to how are they going to actually take care of these fermentations. And then I think it was only the day after the lockdown started that many guys realized that they will be able to actually go into the winery and take care of the wines, and they just limit the contact of the people. So that was the first front. And then secondly, the uncertainty of our exports. This time of year, it's our time to release some of the 2019 vintage wines. And to budget for those exports was quite difficult, with losing market time and knowing when our wines will actually be able to be shipped. So there was this initial fright from that as well, and it's still kind of lagging at the moment. And just this delay in allocation confirmations and when the wines will be able to actually go to the market is a big concern. But yeah, so that's just on that front. On a positive note, we got to spend a lot of time in the vineyards now and focusing on details there, as well as in the winery. So there's some silver lining to this, and getting back to the winery with a lot of focus as an independent producer on other things that really make a big difference on our operation.
I've today received emails, one from Mike and one from Carolyn, that both the Stellenbosch group, I think the wine roots and the Hemelanada growers or producers, have both made representations to the government today. I just wondered, either or both of you, whether you think you're going to get an audience there. What convinces you that the government is willing to listen?
Shall I start? Or?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, we have a very good relationship with the Western Cape government. So I'm not sure what that means in terms of national government, but obviously certain lobbying can be done. And I already had responses from the Premier and the Speaker and the Economic Unit that they received the document and that they were doing everything in their power to actually help us.
Mike?
Yeah, we did get our submission in on behalf of Stellenbosch today. It was done in consultation with all the major bodies, along similar lines to VinPro. Our two biggest concerns were specifically around exports. We know that the export restriction will be lifted effective midnight on Thursday, but there were a lot of gray areas, as you mentioned, Tim, so we need to get clarity on that. And the second point was specifically around e-commerce. Given that South Africa is the only major wine consuming country in the world that's not allowing e-commerce and home delivery of wine. So we've put in quite a big push for that. But essentially our position was, you know, we support fully the government's efforts. And in fact, in many ways, they're doing a great job. We support lockdown, but we don't support breakdown. We don't think that we should be devastating the economy. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that hasn't been picked up by government. And I'm hoping that the submissions that were given to government today will go some way towards alleviating and grabbing hold of some of that low-hanging fruit.
Are you two speaking to Pretoria, or are you talking to Cape Town, effectively?
We're speaking to anyone. Similar to Carolyn, we've also spoken to the Premier. We've spoken to, well, basically everybody. And I have to say, I spoke to Siobhan Thompson of Wines of South Africa today, and she was very clear when I spoke to her. She said, government is communicating, and actually the channels are open and they are listening, but it is a very complicated situation. So hopefully logic and sense will prevail, Tim.
I mean, there's been a couple of things said, one by a UK importer and one, I think, by an official body in South Africa, sort of saying that there was a political bias involved here, that it was a kind of DA, ANC thing. It was Pretoria against the Western Cape. I mean, do you, Rico, I mean, do you get that sense when you're actually talking to these people?
No, Tim, no, not that. I think what's an overriding principle is when lockdown started, government formed a central team, which in terms of the Disaster Management Act operate, and I think initially, rightly so, safety was a big issue. Back to alcohol, I think what was a worry, once again, in terms of our history, there is a history of alcohol abuse in the country. We do the numbers every year. We know 25% of alcohol in South Africa is illegal or illicit, as we call it. That'll be concoctions. And what we also know is once you go into prohibition like you do now, that sector goes on the up. So I think the reason given to us when they revoked the transport element to the harbour was that criminality is a worry to them. And whilst I don't agree with the decision they took, because I would argue if criminality of cargo going to the harbour is your challenge, I would tell the industry to safeguard the cargo, meaning you truck the containers in a convoy or with security or whatever. But I think the third concern, which I understand is valid, is that the government is really concerned that hospitals and medical centres might be overcrowded with alcohol-related incidents. And I think that's something I understand. The question is, how do you strike a balance? And just to comment on the submission. So in our local market submission that we submitted earlier today, and yes, we are in discussion with Pretoria, we opted for a phased approach. We consider limiting volume per purchase, obviously social distancing, and we also start with the low-risk channels, which we think is in grocer for starter, where essential foodstuff is sold. We do think for the wine routes, it could be e-trade as well as delivery or pickup, and then Salador, which we believe are the four things which is valid to consider from a low risk.
Okay, I just wonder one question. Let's go back in time a little bit. We're lucky to have Ken here. I mean, Ken's not much older than I am. He's probably younger than I am. He just looks older than I am. Hello, Ken. Be nice maybe to get Ken to say whether you can look to the past and say, we've been through worse than this before. What can we learn from what the industry's been through in the past that could maybe sustain us now?
Tim, thank you. Thank you, panel. You know, I think what we have here is a complete unknown. I mean, this COVID, every country, everybody's tried to kind of get a handle on it, get a grip on it. And there's so much disinformation and so much unknown. And I think that the primary objective here was safety, was to absolutely maintain safety and not overwhelm the medical hospital system. I think that was crucial. And I think government's done a great job to get that right. I think that we can commend their efforts 100%. But, you know, the devil's in the detail. And when you look at all the little details and the law of unintended consequence, we might be collateral damage to what they're trying to do, to what they've attempted to do. And I think it's just a question of representing ourselves as Vinpro and the team have done, and Woza have made great representation. And yes, government is listening. And have we been in a worse position than this? Hell yes. Can you imagine the situation we were in during apartheid, when shops in London that were stocking South Africans' wines were bricks were thrown in through the windows, and people simply hated South African wine? Yes, we've been in worse situations, and I think we've done a lot right since then, and I think we've come a long way, and I think that we'll get through this. And I'm sure we need to just be very careful, tread very lightly, and see what we can do to get through. There's going to be a major competitive disadvantage going forward, particularly the likes of supermarkets who have to fill shelf space, and where we can't fulfill orders, where we can't get wine into those spaces, they'll fill them with something else. We're going to have to reclaim that space. Our work is cut out for us. We've got a long road ahead of us.
Maybe that's the time to ask David Cartwright how you're finding it on the ground in terms of, are the supermarkets saying, well, if you can't supply X litres of 1,000 hectolitres or whatever of Sauvignon Blanc by the end of next month, we're going to Hungary or somewhere else? Are you finding that?
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, panel. In fact, we're finding a lot of what Jono was saying at the very start. So we're finding a lot of collaboration, and the one thing supermarkets have to deal with is what is actually true, what's happening, what's real, what can they control. At the end of the day, we're in the supply chain business, and I have to keep reminding myself, and I always remind my suppliers that that's what we are in. It happens to be a lovely product, wine. It could be toilet rolls, but it is wine, and we are in the supply chain business. So one thing that's more important than anything, and building on from what Ken said around uncertainty, the one word which is and cannot be forgotten is availability. That's the key word which I and my suppliers live and die by. As an agent, we have to add value. We have to show that we're proving our value, and this is the case whether we are in crisis, which we are now, or in normal times. So and I know Victoria Mason is in the room. I think we've, as one of the suppliers of premium South African wines to the multiple sector and the Indies, we're finding two things: one, incredible support, and secondly, very clear and open lines of communication. Because again, building on what Ken said, it's all around trust, and we've got to make sure the retailers believe in us and trust in us. And going back to, again, just still building on what Ken said for a second, when you're in a crisis situation, let's compare it to a product recall. Retailers want to know four things, and I think we can use those four aspects to what the crisis is now, whether it's post Friday with hopefully the lifting to level 4, and then whenever new normal becomes. And those four things are: what's happened, why is it happened, what have you done to make sure it doesn't happen again, and let's review shortly. And those are the 4 key points.
I think South Africa enjoys a lot of goodwill. It's not just, I think Naked Wines were offering a support package of some description. I know Berry Brothers today were offering Bernhard Wines as an en primeur. Has anybody else on the panel got other examples of markets around the world that are supporting South Africa? Hein, and what are the Chinese saying? Are they being supportive?
I can comment on this, just probably going back to the UK example.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
As you mentioned, there's a huge amount of sympathy towards our situation at the moment. It makes it quite difficult that we are unique in this, that there are no other, as alluded to earlier, there are no other countries that exports have been banned. You mentioned Victoria Mason earlier. She's gone to literally the end of the earth to move around promotions. So we've got 1 or 2 big commercial lines in Waitrose that were due for promotion. As you know, in the UK supermarket sector, between 80 and 90% of your wine annually is sold on promotion. So all of a sudden, if we can't deliver one of those promotions, it's a huge mess, and that really does it counts out the bodies at the end of the year when no, it's not the buyer's fault. They look to see how A, South Africa's performed, and B, the brands have performed. And to be able to move promotions is no easy task, because you're literally moving one country, one sector, one brand potentially in amongst that whole wine sector. So I think there has been a lot of sympathy, and that goes a long way with the UK supermarket sector.
Are there other countries that are being supportive as well?
Well, I think if you look at Systembolaget a couple of nights ago, the details are still quite sketchy. I think there needs to be clarity, but they've declared force majeure for South Africa, which in a monopoly environment really does make a difference again, because you're relying on an algorithm at the end of the year to see if South Africa's up or down and your own brand is up or down. And if it's not, potentially the whole country could start to slide. So that kind of, as I said, there's still details that need to come out about it, and we still need to wait. The difficulty for everybody concerned is we don't know when the date is. Rick and his team have done a great job to potentially get us to start to export on Friday. Who knows that we won't, as a country, as a province, go back to stage 5 in a couple of weeks' time or a month's time, and exports close again. So without the certainty, it's very, very difficult for these guys, for these buyers, for these segments, for these guys that are trying to run their own business, to show sympathy and to maneuver things to accommodate us.
Hein, can you give us a Chinese perspective?
Yeah, thank you. And yes, the whole network that we service in China are very supportive. We get orders like every week, definitely from different parts of the distribution network. And they're all very, very supportive. So as soon as we open up the distribution for export, then we will ship quite a few containers going out to China now. But as you said, they are keen on doing business with South Africa, and they are really supportive in stock movement that they do have and don't have, and allow us to move stock from one place to another. So we cannot complain their loyalty towards South Africa at the moment.
I think this whole point about, I think the Economist was saying that you don't beat COVID, you just reset the clock. And I think at the moment what every country in the world is trying to do is reset the clock and buy themselves time. I mean, it sounds to me as if there's a good chance that with this move to level 4 next week and after the May Bank holiday, that exports may be allowed to move again. I mean, Rico's nodding. Maybe we should talk a bit more about the domestic situation, because COVID's not going to go away. South Africa, has lots of informal settlements, and so far, Jono, I think you should lead this section. In you go.
Well, can we ask one more question on the exports before we move on?
Of course you can. Yeah.
A lot of the smaller winemakers that I was chatting to were expressing concern. They were saying being allowed to export or getting our product offshore is one thing. But the next thing is A, loss of listings, which we've touched on a little bit, but B, how thirsty is Europe, for example, going to be? And a lot of them were referencing reports of huge wine surplus in Europe right now. I'm wondering, is that a concern for South Africans exporting wine? Do we see a threat as wines in Europe are discounted? Are we going to see that even once we can export it, we face a whole nother level of challenges? I'm not sure if anyone can talk to that.
Can I just quickly butt in? I just wanted to talk about bottling. Where do we sit? Which level is that at? Because that's obviously a big issue for people as well that need to export. So, it's the whole supply chain. How do we manage that? I don't know, Rico, if you've got any clarity on that, which level that's going to come in at. And I agree with you, Jono. I think that there are some real issues. I mean, Spain definitely has a huge surplus of wine, and of course, they're being backed up by the EU.
Yeah, Tim, I'm not sure if I can go. Look, from a very good point, Carolyn. I think it's also initially when we got the exports, it stated finished goods. Now, there's not a lot of the smaller wineries who's got finished goods in the sense of certified goods labeled. So most certainly, to your point, Carolyn, what will be allowed is to complete the whole manufacturing process, which will mean you could blend, you could manufacture, you could bottle, label, certify, and transport and export via road into Africa, as well as harbour and airport. And that goes with very stringent protocols. And for example, the manufacturing, the pack line side can only initially run at 20%, which we propose should be 30%. But one can understand that there is social distancing and protocols, but most certainly without being able to manufacture, there's little use in having exports. Jono, perhaps just to your point, 60% of the exports are bulk wine. Obviously, what happens in Europe in commodity wine or generic is very important. I don't want to go to the weakness of the rand, but to some extent there is some exchange rate. But we are cautiously aware. We've done brilliant work, WOSA specifically, to grow value in international markets. Tim, to your point earlier, and it would be a crying shame if we overnight lose that price points due to discount. But I think, as I have it, there's no reason for hysteria at all. I think there are sound channels, good markets. And I think to the earlier comment, we have been inundated from embassies and importers and markets all over the world of letters of support coming in for South Africa, understanding, having empathy. And I think that's important, but they cannot wait for us forever, I suppose. We need to get back in the market.
Yeah, so I think maybe that's a good time to switch over to the domestic market. We know that one of the biggest challenges, I mean, distributors, their job has kind of evaporated overnight, given that the restaurant industry doesn't exist right now. And some of the predictions coming out are that at least 35% of restaurants are predicted to close by the end of this dark time. So it feels like locally there has to be a drastic change for us to continue going. Now, South Africa, if I'm right, Rico, splits roughly 50-50 between domestic and international. Is that correct? Yeah, so a lot of small distributors, and for a consumer, it's really exciting because we're seeing online retailers that didn't exist slowly starting to pop up. I'm just wondering how, perhaps from some of the bigger producers, can you tell us a little bit about what plans you may have afoot in order to maximize the changes that are going? What are your plans to move into the domestic market, given that the entire system is changing?
Jono, just to put it in context, we're probably a medium-sized producer, and we're looking at 50% of our business is exported, all of it bottled, all of it is finished product. We don't export any bulk at all. So we're very reliant, 50% of our business is reliant on the local market. And of that, possibly 80% of that 50% is restaurant focused, as on-trade focused, as opposed to off-trade. There's obviously going to be a huge slowdown in restaurants in the off-trade. On-trade is closed for now as well. So there's no market movement at this stage, and possibly not until we get to level 3, which is probably only in a month's time. But we're all guessing. There's no certainty on these things. I think that our overriding kind of guide through these times is that, without a doubt, the world has slowed down. The world will slow down. World markets are going to slow down. There's a surplus in Europe. Sure, we get that. But we need to be brutally honest. And in a crisis, honesty is our best defense. And not just a defense, but our best way forward is to say to people, this is who we are, this is where we are. And I think there is a lot of empathy out there. And I think in the local market as well, where you look at restaurants as they reopen, supporting there's going to be a need to support your restaurant. I mean, we need to get into our restaurants. We've had wine producers say to a restaurant I'm involved in that we'd like to offer you 120 bottles of wine when you get going again, just to start you off, just to set you up. And we're getting those sort of notes, those sort of mentions. So I think that we all need to support each other. We're in this together, and it's going to be a long, dry summer, if I could paraphrase. And I think we've got to accept that nobody's going to make any profit out of this. We will all keep each other alive.
And how many wineries in the Western Cape have restaurants or cellar door operations? I mean, it's particularly the restaurants. I mean, Hein and Carolyn, you've got 2 very successful restaurants. Maybe just give a bit of perspective from you guys and say, is there a way you could make a restaurant work in a socially distanced world?
I think, if I can talk about Franshoek now, that we are in, we have 52 wineries, but 63 restaurants. Now, most of the wineries do have a restaurant as well. So we're sort of in the tourism business. We're not the producing business. We're in a tourism operation business. At least 50% of our energy is going into the tourism side. Now, if the restaurants doesn't open, we will not find people coming to taste at the wineries. And that for me is a big concern. Not only the money that you will lose from income of tourism visiting you, it's also the staff that you have. So you're running a lot of staff that you can't keep busy. So somehow you need to motivate people. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I think in this whole chaos at the moment, for me, the biggest challenge is to motivate my team and keep them focused on when we open up again, we will accelerate into the online business. Obviously, there's a lot of online opportunities that will come from this. And I think the online as a platform will definitely accelerate in all the forms. So we will accelerate on that because for this year towards December, I cannot see that the tourism as a category will come back to where it was, or even close to half of where it was. And for us as wine tourism people, yes, we do sell wine, but we are a tourism business. It's very, very tough at the moment.
Melissa Sutherland is saying we really need to be a domestic tourism drive. Carolyn, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think whatever product however we modify our products, and we've already kind of thought about how we're going to do that, it kind of needs to translate into an international market eventually. But I think that, that's probably, I would say, 18 months down the line when we have a vaccine for COVID-19. So it's quite a long way down the line still. And I think, for me, the critical thing is there are a few issues that I cannot understand, just going back to exports, why they're not allowed, considering it makes no difference to any consumption of alcohol in South Africa. Then the second point, and I think we've lost out on some time there, and a lot of income for South African wine business. And then the second part was really e-commerce. Just makes sense to me. It's so much more preferential than, if you're going to open up something, e-commerce should be the first thing that we open up. And I think, what we expected to happen in 5 years is going to happen in 5 months in e-commerce in South Africa. That's my feeling. So we are quite well prepared for that. And there are a lot of people placing orders, but of course we can't fulfill those orders or dispatch those orders until the lockdown is lifted. But it's just ridiculous, the e-commerce situation, because it literally takes one person to pack. If someone orders online, it takes one person to pack that package and another person to deliver it. I mean, that's really good in terms of social distancing. So for me, it really makes sense to do it. Our UK online facility has been doing very good business. Ultimately for me, it's not just about making money. It's about making sure that we keep the business going and that we keep our staff employed. And for me, it's about preventing job losses, and it's about looking after the community. Besides what I've been doing, working on these projects, I've also been working on a food relief project in Amanus, and it's huge. It's quite devastating to see how much work there is to be done in the community.
I think the last three contributors can lead us into a next question. You were talking about needing to uplift people, and Hein, you were talking about needing to motivate your team, and Ken, you mentioned that it's going to be a long, dry summer. And I thought perhaps, Mark, again, there are some smaller producers who will not survive the long, dry summer. And I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of, is that it's one thing to have a lean summer, it's another thing not to be around at the end of it. And Ev, I know you've dealt with a lot of small guys, and you've seen your company historically deal with people going through crises. Is there any way that you guys are perhaps positioning yourself in order to support some of your smaller producers?
John, I think, again, it probably carrying on from what Carolyn said about looking after staff and looking after people involved in the business. Vinimark at the moment, our number one goal is essentially to not have any retrenchments and not to have any pay cuts. That's it's a condition we've taken for certainly April and May. No business can survive without cash flow, and we're going to have to look to get creative there. I think the difficulty again in looking domestically as a domestic market is that our economy is going to take a massive knock. Every single family in South Africa is going to take a massive knock. There are very few people that are going to come out of this better than they were. So it's one thing to look domestically to see how we can create wine tourism again, but we're all going to have very limited cash, and that cash has to try and stimulate. I will say from a smaller point of view is yes, mini market is a very big machine. It's a very big wine business, and we've always been fairly focused, unashamedly on the grocer sector. There's certainly room in the portfolio for a lot of unique producers. A couple obviously on the panel tonight for Carolyn Martin, smaller producers. And there must be some security in that, because our goal, just like with keeping staff on, is to pay all of our farms exactly what they're owed on the right date. There's I know some big distributors that have taken a different stance on that, and it's none of our business how they're running their business. Really, really great wine brands out there. It's going to rely on all of us to play our part, all of the bigger wine businesses in South Africa to play their part to try and, that rising tide that lifts all boats. So potentially that means taking on quite a few smaller producers that might not make it. So be it. That's what we'll look to do, look to get creative. And I think it's all of our responsibility to do that. And maybe Hein can speak to that.
I'd quite like to hear from Mike. Go ahead and hear from Mike. Mike, can you're pretty good at marketing. I mean, what are you looking at as a way out of this?
Well, that it's been alluded to by quite a few of the panelists, but survival is going to be the first instinct that needs to kick in. There's no point having a new business model if your business is gone. The pivot to digital and to online has to be massive. And right now it's a case of unlocking any available pipeline that cash can come through. So unlocking the export pipeline is the first place that cash can come through. E-commerce is the next one, and then finally liberating the full might of the local market in terms of grocers and all the other small restaurants. That's going to come much later. But I think one thing is very clear, is it's never going to be the same again. If we talk about just a few producers not going to be able to make it, I think that we're significantly underestimating the severity of the situation. I think it's going to be relatively wholesale. There's going to be a large group of people. Wineries are famous for putting out a press release when they launch, but you'll never get a press release from a winery when it goes out of business. So I think we need to look at creative ways for the wine industry and the entire country to support these businesses. And then just one final comment, also picking up on what Carolyn started. Stellenbosch has really come together, formed a joint venture between the university, municipality, winery, the full tourism community to launch stellenboschunite.org. And literally tens of thousands of meals and food hampers are going out every single week. And that's happened extremely quickly. So I just think while it might feel like doom and gloom, humans are pretty resilient, and there's some pretty amazing things going on at the moment. And that's pretty exciting.
Jono, Polly's saying to us, there are lots of questions in the room. Are there any other points you wanted to get from the panel, or shall we open it up to questions?
There was one question from the room that specifically dealt with exports, asking, and I'm not sure anyone can answer this, but the comment earlier about there being surplus in Europe, especially of bulk wines, and how is South Africa positioned in Europe? And the real question is, there's a lot of growth potential in Africa. Are South African exports reflecting that, or is it not a serious alternative market right now? Dave, I'm not sure if you want to start off on that.
I certainly think it is, John. Africa, it must be our China. I think if no winery is looking at it that way, we really should start. It's a growing market. We've seen it happen in South Africa over the last 15, 20 years, and many markets in Africa are doing exactly the same. There's proximity. We're in the same time zone. There's a cultural similarity that makes trading in Africa different. But yet again, we've seen in a lot of lucrative African markets that it's reliant on other forces. The oil price, which we've seen recently, just collapse again. That kind of sidelines Nigeria and Angola, and to a certain extent Mozambique, as far as Forex goes, and as far as getting foreign currency out of it. So there are certainly pitfalls and there are difficulties in trading in Africa. But without doubt, I would say the potential in Africa is what we must be focusing a little bit closer to home at the moment.
Okay, questions from the floor, Polly?
Yeah, okay, so I'd like to welcome David Clark, who's one of our attendees, who has some questions for you on D2C. David, can you hear us, and can we hear you?
I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me.
We sure can.
Hang on, do I not have a video? No, I'm just a name apparently. That's okay. Yeah, obviously the on-premise market has collapsed. I mean, for those who don't know me, I'm a local distributor, focusing mostly, well, up until recently, focusing mostly on-premise to access the tourist market in South Africa. I saw that collapse by 95% pre-lockdown on the March 26th. What options are open to wine producers and wine distributors for direct to consumer, and should consumers expect just a massive amount, a barrage of information from different parties looking to go direct to them?
Who wants to answer the question?
I can answer that. I think it's really important that one establishes your social media, over time, and that's certainly something that we've been working on for a long time. I don't think anybody wants a hard sell. People are very keen to work with brands that have a really good reputation and that they really feel comfortable with. So I think, for some of people that have not been involved in e-commerce, it's going to be really much harder for them, and for other people that have been working on it for a while, I do think the psyche of the South African economy is going to change in terms of e-commerce, especially when it comes to wine, which is good. Yeah, so that's my feeling on it. It's about a reputation over time and people trusting your brand. Evan, I just wanted to say thank you to Vinnie Mark for being so honorable. You guys are great. One of the problems that we've had actually is that a lot of our people that we supply, they're just kind of saying, well, we can't pay you. And I mean, that's really worrying for us. That is really, so I think that for me, one of the issues that I am concerned about is the whole chain effect, because you kind of think that you've looked at your cash flow and you've really done it really carefully because it's going to be very painful for the next 6 months to a year. And then you actually realize that there are a lot of people that are not that clued up in terms of finance, and I'm worried about that.
So my comment on David Clark's question.
I've lost Mike. Mike, we lost you.
All right, well, we'll jump into the next one. Christina, I've brought you in. You emailed several questions and you've asked some in the chat. Would you like to go ahead and put those to the floor?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And thank you for such a wonderful event. And yes, let's pull together. Whatever we call ourselves, the group of South Africans moving the wine industry forward. So my question was, how can you get money now? One of the problems with the wineries, and I've talked to a few wineries, and some say maybe the method of empreneur might be a way of going forward. It's about money now. Wineries need money now. Exports and payment terms, etc., is all good. How do we do that? How do we get around that?
Just quickly to jump in, I mean, Bernhard could probably, you knew this was happening, I think. That's exactly what Berry Brothers did today for you, that they said, these wines, great wines, they're about to be released, we can't get them out of the country, buy now, yeah, and place your order. So when I did that, I'm sure I wasn't alone. And I think if all importers did that, it would slightly soften the blow. Yeah? I mean, I don't know, were you aware it was happening?
Yeah, no, certainly I'm extremely grateful to be working with a family of importers in different markets, but especially in the UK, having a bit of relief offered from my importers there, in a sense of trying to sell the wines that was intended to be on the ship by now, on premier to the market, which Tim mentioned, reached them today. And then also by selling wines this way, I would think that it's also a COD transaction. So payment terms for that case is a bit easier to have the money reach us here quite quicker, and then we can also supply. Our harvest is just finished, so we can also supply our grape farmers with the necessary payments that's due also April, May after harvest. So I think by doing that, it's a very great idea from our importers, and then also, because they were usually 85% of my wines would probably go to on-premise sales, and which all have 30 to 60 day payment terms. But now having these transactions COD, I think the money will come down more efficiently and sieve down to even my bottommost suppliers as well as a small winery.
Then, Tim, I know you mentioned it earlier, but perhaps it is worth going back to what Naked Wines have done by bringing $5 million US into the market specifically to invest in smaller producers. I'm not sure if there are other initiatives out there, if anyone wants to talk to that, but I think that's an amazing move towards people who are struggling the most.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and I think they deserve praise for it. To be honest, I wasn't completely aware of the detail. I know Richard Kershaw, who might be watching this evening, certainly works with them. Richard, if you're out there watching, it'd be good to hear a little bit more from you about how it's working. But I think the, initiatives like that and what we talked about Systembolaget doing, committing, I think, to a certain amount of South African wine for this year, those are crucial, really. I mean, you know, Mike, I don't know if you're back online now, but Mike, you've made a lot with, a lot of your business has been en primeur anyway, isn't it? You've sold futures, really, of Villafonte to a pretty significant degree, haven't you?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, and it's not something that can just be switched on. And I have to say, it remains a very small part of our business. It's a good part of our business, but very small. And just apparently, I got cut off by the internet earlier on David Clark's question. You know, customers are really looking for DTC. They're looking for offers. They're looking for really interesting wines. So if you're looking at starting a DTC business, do it. If your offers are not interesting, nobody's going to buy them.
Another question?
Can I just add?
Sorry.
I just wanted to add, I can't think of a more interesting stable than for David Clark's ex-Animo to come online. So I personally, as a consumer, am very excited. Roll out.
So there's a great question in the Q&A. This says, could you perhaps comment on what the situation is like in other New World wine countries that rely on the Northern Hemisphere as an export market in comparison to South Africa? Is South Africa on the back foot with regard to competition? So maybe some perspective on this. Anyone?
I think we are a little bit because of this lag in exports, to be honest with you. It is a bit of a worry for us.
I think the other point is that the on-trade is collapsing all over the world. It's not funny at all, it's dramatic. So there are going to be a lot of wineries with a lot of wine to sell, and desperate wineries cut prices, basically. So I think I hope it won't be a bloodbath, but I think it's going to be a pretty competitive world out there. And you mentioned earlier EU grants. We don't know to what extent the EU will help to support, you know, growers in Spain and Italy and France, etc., the three biggest European producing markets. But it's going to be very competitive, I think.
I think if I could just chip in there, I think we do have a slight issue that affects Spain, South Africa, and I guess Argentina particularly, which is the image in some countries of South Africa as a supplier of bulk wine, and the separation of the super premium wines that we all know, and we all know how good they are. But there is that picture of South Africa as a place that delivers large amounts of wine that disappears into the countries it goes to. And I think that's going to be a question of separation of the two sides of South Africa, that polarization that currently exists.
And the weakness again of the rand, which is, it's horrible to say this, but a positive thing in some respects as far as exports are concerned, is not going to help people to put the prices up, is it? It basically means that, you know, that bulk market is going to be pretty important, I think. I mean, Rico, you're the person I've had more conversations with about bulk wine than anybody else in the world. Tell us what's going to happen to the bulk market.
Yeah, look, just a comment. Look, I think we've got two industries in one. We've got a generic industry and we've got a premium industry, and we should admit it. It's two separate models, and I think both of those models can be and are competitive. So I think on the if we work on the assumption that we are back in the market on Friday, I do think that for the generics that would be an easy way to start shipping again and take it forward. I want to link to Mike's point, because not to go into horrible things, but we've done some simulations this morning, and what the industry is going to run into is a severe cash flow drought. It's not a climate drought, it will be a financial drought in June, July, August. And the work we're doing now is to seek a way and an avenue to get the industry to end of August and September. So we're working with the banks, we're looking at excise. Unfortunately, a lot of the government incentives wineries doesn't qualify for. But if I can put out a plea to the international community, it would be that where possible, that we stick to trading terms. Because cash flow now becomes critical, and I think the smaller wineries, those premium, interesting ones, Tim, that you write up quite a bit, we are risk losing a lot of them, and the numbers are severe. We could, without assistance, we could lose between 60 to 80 wineries, which will be a catastrophe. So we think we can circumvent this, but we shouldn't underestimate that we will have to have huge collaboration to navigate through this.
Thank you.
So just a couple questions from the audience, and they tend to follow similar trends. So how do you see the role of virtual marketing when in fact now large commercial enterprises are undertaking virtual wine marketing? And at the same time, returning to David's question about D2C, how do we do this in a space, and David, I'm making an assumption about your question, in a space where we are now about to become very competitive? And I think that this is an important question, because we've had this time and again on these panels as we approach different regions and different issues. It's not just South Africa, but what are your thoughts on how can we differentiate ourselves in what is now a very competitive virtual market? Anyone? Mike, you might start this.
I'm also happy to talk about it when you're ready.
The common denominator of most virtual online marketing is it's pretty boring. So if you want to differentiate yourself, don't be boring. I've looked at the market all around the world, and a lot of winemakers have got time on their hands, so they're pulling up their iPhone and taking a video of themselves tasting through their latest cuvee. It's just not that interesting. So I think that there needs to be a higher grade look at this whole virtual marketing, virtual online marketing concept. It can be brilliant. The technology exists. In fact, most of it's free. It just needs to be done properly. And, I think the launch pad is going to be without wine, certainly from a South African context, because we can't send wine to people ahead of a virtual marketing, a virtual tasting. But ultimately, it's going to be much more sophisticated when we can send sample packages via courier to customers. And let me just throw a novel idea out. What if you could charge for a virtual tasting? Thanks, Tim.
Well, that's exactly what 67 Pall Mall are now doing. They're doing a series of tastings with experts, including me and Jess Morris and Jane Anson, various other people, and people can buy the wine, so that the wine that you as a speaker, or it could be a winemaker, a tasting, is the same wine that the 200 people around the world, or probably in Europe for the moment, could be tasting at the same time. And I think that's a way forward. I think, as you said, somebody sniffing a glass of Chardonnay and saying it smells of peaches or lemons is actually not a very interesting subject or matter with which to engage. So I think, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that this virtual marketing may, especially if restaurants don't reopen, that restaurants are going to have to rethink themselves the way 67 Pall Mall has done as a club. It's used its very large, well, a significant number of members, all of whom are committed to wine and have disposable income, or certainly did before this came along, and making the most of that. I mean, it's about opportunities, I think.
Speaking from the Instagram generation, you know, all that's out there right now is guys sipping wine that you can't taste and telling you how good it tastes. And you know, it just hurts to watch. There's nothing attractive about that. Benguela Cove have done a fascinating little experiment where the winemaker Johan Fourie has engaged with corporates in Europe, where he'll sell a couple of cases, and with the sale is a tutored tasting. So he's using the digital experience of, well, I'm here, but my wine is already in Europe. So for producers doing that, he's trying to differentiate himself by adding that, I guess, value add in a way that seems quite novel, because you can't taste cherries, but you certainly can soak up the genius of a winemaker sharing, you know, pulling back the curtain and showing what he's doing in the cellar. Carolyn, do you want to talk?
I was just going to ask you a question. Can I ask you a question before Carolyn comes in? I just want to know if there's anything you'd learned from coffee that we can apply to wine.
Sure. Well, what we are having to do, I mean, is exactly that. So, you know, in chats with smaller producers, I've been amazed at the creativity of that, and realized that people want to learn. I mean, we live in an information age. We all say this, and we all complain about how we're flooded with information. But actually, you know, anyone who's following you online, especially in a specialist industry like coffee or wine, you already have the nerds with you. You don't have a casual drinker following you on Instagram. You have someone who's into fermentation or yeast strains or old vessels. And I think that's something to be said, is that we are going to have to maximize on the nerds. And obviously I'm talking for boutique producers, because that's what I'm interested in. But from a coffee perspective, we are going deep into nerd territory and finding people are responding really well.
Sorry, Carolyn, I cut you off.
I think, you know, the interesting thing is to work across many different platforms, because of course you have different audiences on different platforms. And fortunately, I've got a really pretty tech savvy team. I'm sort of the only BC child, although I do quite a lot of my stuff myself, and they say that I'm not too bad. I think what's really good is, you know, we've done some interesting live tastings with master court sommeliers like Tobias Brauweiler, which we did with JC last week. And that wasn't just about a wine, it's about kind of getting to know a philosophy, a method of winemaking. A lot of winemakers actually watching it at the same time as other people. So it's about your reputation in the industry, as well as clients watching it. And, you know, afterwards people opened up a couple of bottles of our wine and said, you know, we watched this tonight. And so therefore, we felt that it would be kind of cool to actually drink what was in our cellar. So I think, you know, there were about 100 people watching that. That was a start. We're doing a couple more. And we've also been doing a lot of educationals, giving recipes online, actually doing little demonstration videos of how to pair wine and food, because that's what we're famous for. So we're doing what we know best, you know, how we do it.
Someone tell us about TikTok. Jono, what's TikTok?
I can tell you about TikTok.
I hope it's not somebody who's streamed in from a porn site or something, and I've just completely blown my credibility forever. What is TikTok?
It's so very cool.
If you want to know a winery who it has actually embraced TikTok, Tim, I will just say Serrano Wine probably has one of the funnier, more TikTok specific, like they understand how it works. They have a great feed on it. I just wanted to jump in because I know we're at 8:09 and we've asked a lot of time of our panelists. And so I wanted to kind of wrap up with a question that I think is very important to the people who are not a part of the wine industry, who may be listening to this on podcast or on YouTube, which is, how do we as the public support you to support these wineries in this era, in the next 6 months, throughout the next year? What can we do to make a difference? Anyone?
Buy wine.
Yeah. What you can do as up, you must come and visit us in South Africa. We need tourists. We need people to come and spend time in South Africa and spend their money in South Africa. And I think we were really fortunate the past 2 or 3 years now. foreigners visiting South Africa spend much more money in South Africa than South African spending overseas. So that's really positive that we have the offering of tourism services that people want. And so we want people to come and spend their money here.
I think
until travel bans are lifted, use the time to engage. Never before have brands been more important. What is your brand? You know, you have to, every single winery and further than wine needs a real thorough understanding of exactly what their proposition is, what they're trying to sell and what makes them. Carolyn, you use some really good examples, and use the time to engage. Everybody's got capacity. Time is what we all short of throughout the year. All of a sudden we're all stuck at home. We can do webinars like this, we can invest, we can read, we can listen to podcasts. Use this to try and identify what you like, what you drink. And so when the travel ban lifts, Hein's 100% right, you can jump on a plane, come see us. And the one thing we know is South Africans will absolutely blow your mind when you do get here.
There's a wonderful thing that I've just signed up to online called Tolstoy Together. And it's a group around the world who are all reading War and Peace at the same time. And we read about 15 pages every day. And a woman a journalist or academic, I think, puts up some comments on the 15 pages you're going to read, just saying, look out for this, or this is a great quote. And I wonder whether we couldn't be doing that with maybe a wine book, you know, that everybody reads, maybe not the Oxford Companion to Wine, but maybe we pick a grape variety around the world, and that there's a group of people who all just geek out on Grenache for the day, and you just read, you read 500, 1,000 words about Grenache and exchange ideas about it, or something like that. I don't know.
Maybe sorry, hold on a second. Maybe Tim and Jono, you should do one on coffee and wine. There is a book on coffee and wine already, but maybe you should do one on coffee and wine and work from there.
One piece of my site, and I'm waiting for the second piece.
Just quickly to let you know, we've been working collectively with a whole group of people on the SA wine lockdown, and we've been picking specific cultivars or specific themes and working across the community on those things during the lockdown period. So that's one of the things that we have been doing, but I think it would be really cool to do it on a bigger context, on a more global context. So if anybody wants to put a calendar out there, I'd be so delighted to participate in that.
Yeah, instead of Tolstoy Together, let's do tasting together, or I don't know, something. Think of a better alliteration than that. Bernhard.
I'm going to send you our little calendar, and maybe that'll give you some ideas, Tim, and you can help motivate that. It would be amazing.
All right.
No, Tim, just to get back on some of the virtual feeds and how we as wineries can be a bit more transparent. We surely have seen an increase in requests from our importers, producers from all over the world, asking us to put small 3 to 5 minute videos together of showing something in the vineyard, showing something in the cellar. Be transparent of what's happening there, but also, as Mike mentioned, not on a boring level, and also just speaking from the heart, more of why you rather do what you do than what you do. I think that's important for us to just suck it up. Most of our winemakers and viticulturists, we are quite camera shy and not the best with these things, so we just suck it up and we do it for our importers' sake, and they are really working hard on that side to communicate to the markets. And I would hope these videos and efforts we do on this side actually do reach some of the DTC market, consumer sales on that side with e-commerce and such. And then also locally, a guy like David Clark with Ex-Animo has been doing a substantial amount of work with his podcasts. So for any of those who haven't tuned in on that, that's where he goes around and really interviewing a lot of small producers around South Africa, not just winemakers, but also people in the industry, and speaking to them. And if you have some time to spare, which many people do have during lockdown, it's good to tune in to if you're a wine geek and really want to support our wineries and get more educated and filled in on what's happening. That's also an initiative, and he's very dynamic in that sense. So there's a few options, and people are working behind the scenes on our behalf. We should just keep listening and working on that.
I mean, people seem to be liking the idea of tasting together. So we have Mr. Chenin Blanc here. Hello, Mr. Forrester. How about if everybody tomorrow tastes a South African Chenin Blanc, and the hashtag is tasting together, and we just exchange ideas about it and chat about them and who's drinking what, and everybody got an old one, and it just has to be a Cape Chenin Blanc. How about that? Let's give it a go.
Tim, I'm sure that you'll find a lot of creativity, and I think ideas like this, I mean, just getting together tonight is fantastic, and I think you'll find more and more ideas. And it goes back to what Evan was saying. We've got some time in our hands. We should be using it constructively. And certainly, I would be all for, let's get a Chenin Blanc thing going, and we could follow that on. And I think that what resonates throughout this is we need to be brutally honest with ourselves and about the circumstances we find ourselves in. And we're all in this together. So it's not going to get dramatically better for any one or for any small group. We've got to go through this, and we've got to keep going through this. And there's honesty and creativity will get us through this. It's just going to be a while. There's no quick fix to this, but we need to keep working at it and keep being creative. The more, the merrier. We've got to just stick together and drive it hard.
Hein, before we come to you, one quick question. Is there anybody watching out there who's a tech wizard who can put together a website that's called Tasting Together and get it up by tomorrow? And Ken will do the first little article on Chenin Blanc. It'll just be 1,000 words, 500 words on what Mr. Chenin Blanc likes about Chenin Blanc.
I think the person who can do that is my colleague, Polly Hammond.
Right. Polly,
will have it done probably in half an hour. Can I quickly just chip in? Cape wine, of course, is one of the big things that we all know about South Africa. Can we imagine doing Cape wine virtually, or bringing people into Cape wine in their own countries if everyone's not going to get on a plane necessarily? If we're not all going to be traveling as much in the next year or so, can we imagine doing that? Anyone?
Hein?
Rico, you're nodding.
Hein is waving.
Okay, I just want to add a point on previously. When we open up again, I think we will find a situation where we will have 2019 stock for another 2 or 3 months moving on. Remember, let's say, for instance, the industry is closed for 3 months without selling. We will not move into the new vintage of 2020, but still sitting with 3 months of stock of 2019. So what we will add our database, ask them to stick with us and help us, because 2019 is really a good vintage, and consume those wines before we can move on to 2020. Otherwise, we have another stock issue or write-off of stock, and within this cash flow situation that we do have.
I think a lot of us have always said that South African Sauvignon Blanc is drunk too young. Yes. So now's our chance to prove them wrong.
We had a question just now from Lorraine Geldenaes, again, just talking about education and the role that it'll play. And Evan, you were talking about having time to do this. And I know in the coffee industry, we're always trying to turn enthusiasts into evangelists. And we find that if you can do that, your marketing team grows exponentially. Can any of you guys perhaps talk to ways, Carolyn, you seem to be quite tuned into how you are looking to engage your most loyal customers? Because I think that's going to be key to generating sales in the space.
Yeah, I just want to say Lorraine has done an outstanding job. We had a wonderful talk on biodynamic wines with Rosa and Reinicke. So that was pretty amazing with Johan. It's been a great time for sharing. So people have really sort of invited people to share. And also the talk on Old Vine, the Old Vine project was fantastic. Thank you, Rosa and Andre, for that. So it is really a time for sharing, a time to just be able to absorb a lot of information. And I think that we need to do that. It's really critical. As you say, people have got time like they've never had before, and they want to be entertained, and they want to be educated in interesting ways. And these speakers have been amazing, the discussions that they've had online. So I think another series would be to invite Lorraine and Andre and a few other people onto this panel. And that would be my suggestion, Robert, that you do another talk like this, and we'd all like to tune in and listen to them and learn from them.
This is somebody else.
Well, I think
Clark wants to come back in, doesn't he? I think. Yeah. David, could you unmute yourself?
No, David Cartwright, I think.
Oh, David Cartwright, sorry.
Yes.
DC.
Just unmuting myself there. Yeah, I think we just need to go back with the. I'm just waving waving my hand for the supermarkets in the UK, because they are very supportive of South Africa. And I think it might have been Rico who said we do have a two-tier or two-stream or two-speed market in the UK. So we need to be careful that we're not. Only 6% of the wines are over £10 in the UK. So small initiatives are great, and we need to focus on them. But the bigger picture is, going back to cash flow, is making sure that we do support the quality producers. And I'm fortunate to represent people like Rustenburg and Knonkop, for example. And they're spending a lot of time working hard with the trade and pushing that message for the trade. So I think it's going to be the balance across the overall message is we love South Africa, and we all do love South Africa, which is why we're on this webinar today. So making sure that the wines are ready and able to go on May the 1st is really critical. So goes back a lot to what Rico can do for us, which is communication. All my customers need to be communicated to constantly, as well as, I think tasting together is fantastic. So we need to build on that. How do we get that model into the multiples is a great question, and one that we can ask people like Joe Waring and Victoria Mason going forward.
Sounds good. Any other questions? Mike wants to say something.
Tim, I've got a comment that somehow has been brushed over. South Africa's had a very tough time, and the start of this conversation today was about how unfortunate it is that exports were banned. On top of that, we spoke about how there are very positive and strong relationships with the trade around the world. But I would just like to caution that those are only going to take us so far. The rest of the world's having a hard time. We're going to have to really punch above our weight. We're going to have to come out fighting. We may get one or two easy breaks and one or two easy wins initially, but it's war out there. There's oversupply everywhere, and South Africa is going to have to do a really good job. And then just perhaps a final comment from our side. We need to really look after our people. The enormity of the damage that is being done in the communities, and I'm talking about the lowest common denominator, is quite phenomenal. These are people that literally have no money and can't eat. It's at that level. And so if we want to get our industry back into some normality at some stage in the future, without our people, we'll never be able to do that. And that needs a huge amount of attention from our side. But I think it's really important.
Can I add in there with Mike? I think it's really important what Mike touched on, because we cannot allow people that do have a job at the moment that don't have a job in 2 months from now. So as an industry, we really have to work very hard to make sure that businesses survive and people survive the business with the business. So we from a Meridian point of view, Meridian Wine Merchants is also a wine distribution point that a company that we have. We will not sacrifice anything there. Everything will be in place. We will survive also the 400 people that work there. And I think with each industry or each district, for instance, Franschhoek, we have to sit together as producers, and if there's really a problem with some of the producers, we need to face it as a region. And I think the giving food away, parcels of food away, it's a community-driven initiative. And it's not working in one community, it's working in every community. So it's really fascinating to see how the people really get together and look after the community. And I think as an industry, as a wine industry, we really need to stick together now and look after the people that work in our industry.
Okay, thank you. I think that's probably a good message on which to end, really, one of collaboration and a little bit of hope, relative hope. I think that not just in South Africa, everywhere around the world, these are tough times. And I think little events like these probably help us to exchange ideas and maybe say, hey, we're not in this on our own. Robert said to me at the beginning of this will be up on YouTube and people will be looking back in a year's time. Maybe not, but anyway, I just like to think if people look back at this in a year's time and say, these people made this during this time, and some good ideas came out of it, some positive messages came out of it. So let's protect the smaller wineries, let's do our best for communities that we're involved with, not just in South Africa, but everywhere. And let's spread the love, as it were, really. I think now is the time. It's not about war, it's about peace. Tolstoy Together, please read it.
So thank Tim, can I just now chip in and say, this has been my favorite of all the things we've done, because I haven't had to do anything and I've sat back and just enjoyed the show. So I'd love to thank all of you panelists for taking your time and giving us your time so generously, and also really giving us your opinions and experiences so generously and so openly, and just really as a group. That's what's excited me so much. And seeing the fact that we've had between 80 and 100 people sticking around for an hour and a half, really taking part, and a huge amount of contributions coming in on the chat. So I think we definitely, Polly and I have been talking quietly in the background here. We'd love to do another South African session. You know, we're not in the business of doing tastings and doing the sorts of things that 67 Pall Mall do. We've always been focused on the business of wine, and that's really where the name is. And I've loved the fact that tonight that has been the focus. But I think we'll very happily look at coming back to South Africa and having you guys really coming, maybe looking at a specific aspect of the industry. But I think I'd like to give a really particular thank you to both Tim and Jono, who I know how much work you two have put into this unpaid job. None of us is doing this for any money, but you two have put in an awful lot of dedication and effort and research into this. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being an industry that is working together, and let's just hope that we can, as Mike said, move into the future in a positive way, because you've got so many great wines and the world is open to the sort of wines that South Africa is making. So tomorrow night we're doing something completely different. We're talking about brands. We're looking at 3 different brands, and we've got all sorts of other things coming up this week. So please follow us, subscribe, do all the rest of the stuff, and come up with some other ideas. And you'll see this, if you are subscribed, you'll see when this comes up onto YouTube in the next few days. So go safe, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.